All right, Travis and Doug, I hear you two are down in Fort Lauderdale prepping for your captain's licenses.
Yeah.
Must be tough hitting the books with that beautiful Florida sunshine calling your name.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, we're here to make those study sessions a little more fun and a lot more effective. You've
Yeah.
probably been drilling those sound signals,
Uh-huh.
specifically rules 34 and 35,
Right.
since they're the real meat and potatoes of the exam.
You got that right. And honestly, mastering these rules isn't just about acing the test.
Right.
It's about developing the kind of awareness that could prevent a close call
Yeah.
or worse
Mm-hmm.
out on the water,
Yeah,
especially in a busy boating hub like Fort Lauderdale.
exactly.
Okay.
You know, it's like driving a car in dense fog.
Right.
Your ears become your most important tool.
Right.
So let's dive into why those sound signals matter so much.
Imagine you're navigating a crowded channel. Maybe visibility isn't great.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you hear a series of short, sharp blasts from a nearby vessel.
Okay.
That's their way of saying, hey, I'm here, and I'm doing this even before you can see them clearly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So those sound signals are like a universal language on the water,
Yes.
cutting through the confusion and helping to prevent those, oh no, what are they doing moments?
Precisely. And rules 34 and 35 lay out that language in detail.
Okay.
Let's start with rule 34, which covers situations where you can actually see the other vessel.
So even if you can see each other, those sound signals are still important.
Yes.
Why is that?
Think about it. A quick blast of a whistle can instantly convey whether you're planning to pass on their port or left side or starboard right side.
Okay.
It eliminates guesswork, reduces confusion,
Right.
and that's crucial when you're dealing with vessels moving at speed.
That's a really good point, especially when you're in a tight channel with lots of boat traffic.
Yes.
So what are the specific signals for passing under Rule 34?
All right, picture this.
Okay.
You want to overtake another vessel on their starboard side.
Okay.
You'd signal your intention with 2 prolonged blasts,
Okay.
followed by 1 short blast on your whistle.
Okay. 2 prolonged, 1 short. Got it.
Uh-huh.
And what should the other vessel do if they're okay with the maneuver?
If they're happy with the overtake, they'll respond with a specific sequence.
Okay.
1 prolonged, 1 short, 1 prolonged, 1 short.
Got it.
It's like saying, yep, go ahead, the coast is clear.
So that's how they confirm it's safe to proceed.
Yes.
But what if they see something we don't know? Maybe there's a hazard ahead or the channel narrows up.
That's when the danger signal comes into play.
Okay.
5 or more short, rapid blasts, almost like an alarm bell.
So it's the hold up something's wrong signal.
Yes.
Regardless of who's giving it. I can see why that one's crucial.
Yes.
But why does the overtaken vessel have the final say?
Yeah.
I mean, shouldn't the vessel doing the overtaking be in control?
That's a great question. It's all about perspective.
Okay.
The overtaken vessel has a better view of what's ahead.
Right.
Potential obstacles, shallow water,
Mm.
maybe even another vessel approaching that we can't see.
Yeah.
Their go-ahead is based on having more information about the situation.
That's actually a really important nuance.
Yes.
It's not just about blindly following rules, it's about using common sense
Right.
and recognizing when another vessel might have a better grasp of the situation.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key aspect of Rule 34,
Okay.
the signals for maneuvering when you're not overtaking. Let's say you're approaching another vessel and want to pass on their port side.
Okay.
You'd signal with 1 short blast of the whistle.
1 short blast for port,
Mhm.
easy enough. What about passing on their starboard side?
2 short blasts.
Okay.
Think of it as 1 blast for left,
Okay.
2 blasts for right.
Okay. I can remember that one for left, 2 for right.
Yeah.
But wait, what about if you're going in reverse? That seems like it could catch other boaters off guard.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Anytime you're operating a stern propulsion, you need to signal with 3 short blasts.
Okay.
This lets other vessels know you're moving backward and might not have the same maneuverability.
So 3 short blasts basically means heads up, I'm backing up. I can see how that would be especially important in a crowded anchorage or when maneuvering near a dock.
Exactly. It's about creating that predictability on the water. And remember, these signals aren't just for power boats.
Right.
Sailboats, fishing vessels, pretty much any vessel using sound signals needs to follow these rules.
Okay, so Rule 34 is all about clear communication when you can see each other.
Yes.
But what about when visibility gets tricky, like fog, heavy rain, or even nighttime?
Right.
That's where Rule 35 kicks in.
You got it. Rule 35 is all about sound signals in restricted visibility.
Okay.
And it's a whole other level of crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine trying to navigate a busy waterway.
Yeah.
When you can barely see past your bow, it's like driving with a blindfold on.
Okay, that sounds a little terrifying.
Right.
So how does Rule 35 help us see with our ears in those situations?
It establishes a specific set of signals for different vessel types and maneuvers.
Okay.
Let's start with a power-driven vessel that's underway,
Okay.
meaning it's moving through the water. They need to sound one prolonged blast
Okay.
at intervals of not more than 2 minutes.
So it's like saying, hey, I'm here and I'm moving on repeat, just in case someone missed the last signal.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, what if that power-driven vessel is stopped?
Okay.
Maybe they're having engine trouble or waiting for a bridge to open.
Mm-hmm.
They need to signal differently to avoid confusion.
Okay, so how does a stopped, power-driven vessel signal?
They sound 2 prolonged blasts
Okay.
with a short break between them at intervals of not more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
It's like saying, hold on, I'm stopped here.
I get 1 prolonged blast for moving, 2 for stopped. It seems simple enough.
Yeah.
But I bet it's easy to get mixed up in the heat of the moment,
Yes.
especially with limited visibility adding to the stress.
You're absolutely right. That's why it's crucial to practice these signals until they become second nature.
Okay.
Now let's talk about other types of vessels.
Okay.
Sailboats,
Mm-hmm.
fishing vessels,
Yeah.
or those that might have limited maneuverability for some reason.
Okay, so those vessels might not be able to react as quickly as a powerboat. So how do they signal in restricted visibility?
They signal with 1 prolonged blast,
Okay.
followed by 2 short blasts.
All right.
Also at intervals of not more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
It's a way of saying, hey, I'm here, but I might not be able to get out of your way as quickly, so please proceed with caution.
So it's a heads up to other vessels that they might need to give a wider berth or take extra care when maneuvering around these less agile vessels. This all makes perfect sense.
Right.
I'm starting to see how these sound signals really do paint a picture of the situation,
Yes.
even when you can't physically see what's going on around you.
That's exactly the point. You're creating a mental map of your surroundings based on these sonic clues.
Okay.
And don't forget about anchored vessels. They have their own special signal.
Right, because a boat at anchor isn't moving,
Yeah.
but it's still a potential hazard, especially if it's hidden in fog or darkness.
Yes.
So how do they let other boats know they're there?
They ring a bell rapidly for about 5 seconds at intervals of not more than 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
You know that classic bell sound you hear in old movies when a ship is lost in the fog?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
That makes sense. It's such a distinct sound. There's no mistaking it for anything else.
Yeah.
I bet in a busy anchorage, like the ones you find around Fort Lauderdale, that bell signal is essential for preventing accidents.
Absolutely. And here's a pro tip.
Okay.
Even though anchored vessels are required to signal with a bell, sometimes those bells can blend together in a
Yeah.
crowded anchorage.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a good idea to keep a good visual and radar lookout,
Okay.
even if you're hearing those bell signals.
That's a great point. It's about using all your senses and tools to build that comprehensive picture of what's happening around you.
Exactly.
But what if an anchored vessel senses another boat approaching too close for comfort?
Yes.
Is there a signal for that?
They sure do. They can sound 1 short blast, followed by 1 prolonged blast, and then another short blast. It's like saying, hey, I'm anchored here, be careful.
Okay, so we've covered power-driven vessels,
Yeah.
other vessels, and anchored vessels.
Right.
Are there any other signals covered by Rule 35 that we need to know about?
Not in terms of vessel types, but there are a couple of additional signals that are important to understand.
Okay.
For example, there's a specific signal for vessels that are restricted in their ability to maneuver.
Okay.
Maybe they've lost steering or have a tow line out, something that makes it difficult for them to change course easily.
Okay, so how does a vessel that's restricted in their ability to maneuver signal in restricted visibility?
They sound 1 prolonged blast followed by 2 short blasts repeated at intervals of not more than 2 minutes.
Okay.
It's the same signal used by sailing vessels,
Okay.
fishing vessels,
Yeah.
and vessels engaged in towing or pushing.
Ah, I see. It makes sense to use the same signal for any vessel that might not be able to maneuver as freely as a typical powerboat. It's like a universal, give me some extra space, please, signal.
Exactly. It's all about communicating your limitations to other vessels so they can adjust their actions accordingly.
This is all starting to make so much sense. Now it's not just about memorizing a bunch of blasts. It's about understanding the logic behind the signals and using them to create a mental map of your surroundings, even when you can't physically see everything clearly.
You're getting it, and that's the kind of thinking that will serve you well both on the exam and out on the water.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of Rules 34 and 35, those bread and butter rules for sound signals.
Right.
What else should we be thinking about when it comes to using these signals effectively?
Well, first and foremost, you need to make sure your sound signaling equipment is up to snuff.
Right. I bet it's easy to overlook the simple things like having a properly functioning whistle or bell.
It happens more often than you think. Make sure your whistle is clear of any obstructions, that it can produce a loud and clear sound that meets the regulations, and that your bell is in good working order, especially if you plan to anchor frequently.
That's good advice. But it's not just about having the right equipment, it's about using it correctly, right?
Absolutely. Sound signals should be used strategically, not just blasted out randomly. Think about the information you need to convey and choose the appropriate signal.
Okay, so if you're approaching a blind bend in a channel, that's when you'd use that one prolonged blast to signal your presence, right?
Exactly. It's like saying, hey, I'm coming around the bend, be aware.
And what if you're in restricted visibility and approaching a crowded anchorage?
Right.
That's when those regular sound signals,
Yeah,
one prolonged blast for moving, two for stopped, become even more critical.
precisely. You're creating that sonic breadcrumb trail,
Yeah.
helping other vessels know your general location and movement.
And don't forget that 5-blast danger signal.
Right.
It's like the emergency brake of the sound signal world.
You got it. Anytime you sense danger, doubt, or uncertainty, hit those 5 short blasts.
Yeah.
It could prevent a serious accident.
This is all making so much sense now. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about developing that heightened awareness of your surroundings and using sound to create a clear picture of what's happening,
Yeah.
especially when visibility is limited.
That's the key takeaway here. You're becoming a more aware and proactive boater, and that's what these rules are all about.
Okay, so I've talked about sending those signals, but what about receiving them? What are some key things to keep in mind when you hear another vessel's sound signal?
The first step is to identify the type of signal you're hearing.
Okay.
Is it one prolonged blast, 2 prolonged blasts, 1 prolonged followed by 2 short blasts?
Okay.
Each signal gives you a clue about the other vessel's status and intentions.
So once you've identified the signal, what's next?
Next, you need to assess the situation.
Okay.
Where is the sound coming from? Can
Yeah.
you see the other vessel? What are the prevailing conditions, visibility, wind current, traffic density?
Because the same signal might mean you need to react differently depending on the situation, right?
Exactly. For example, if you hear one prolonged blast in restricted visibility,
Okay.
you know it's a power-driven vessel underway,
Mm-hmm.
but your response will be different if you're in a narrow channel with limited space
Yeah.
versus being out in open water.
Okay, so in a narrow channel, you might need to take immediate action to avoid a close quarters situation, like slowing down, adjusting your course, or even sounding a signal of your own to confirm you've heard them.
Precisely. But in open water, you might have more leeway and simply maintain course and speed while keeping a watchful eye,
Yeah.
ready to adjust if needed.
Makes sense. But what about those 5 short blasts? The danger signal.
Right.
That always means something's up regardless of where you are, right?
Absolutely. 5 or more short blasts is a universal signal for heads up. There's a problem, whether you're giving the signal or receiving it.
Yeah.
It means you need to slow down, assess the situation carefully, and take whatever action is necessary to avoid a potential collision.
Okay, so slow down,
Mhm.
assess, and be ready to react. And if you can't figure out where the other vessel is or what they're doing, is it ever okay to just stop your boat completely?
Absolutely, especially in restricted visibility.
Okay.
Stopping gives you time to listen, evaluate, and try to communicate with the other vessel, if possible. Sometimes a quick radio call can clear up confusion and prevent a dangerous situation.
That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to use your VHF radio to communicate directly with other vessels,
Yes.
especially if
Oh.
you're unsure about the situation.
Exactly. Good communication is one of the best tools we have for staying safe out on the water.
This is all starting to feel like a real game changer. You know, like I'm not just memorizing rules anymore. I'm starting to see how these sound signals can truly help me navigate safely and confidently, even in challenging conditions.
That's fantastic to hear. That's exactly the kind of awareness we're trying to cultivate. And remember, it's a two-way street.
Okay.
It's not just about hearing those signals, but also about responding appropriately
Right.
and working together to create a safe environment for everyone.
Okay, so it's a team effort, not just following the rules, but using them in a way that promotes clear communication and safe practices for all boaters. This is all fantastic information.
Yes.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
You're right.
There's so much more to dive into.
We've covered the foundations of Rules 34 and 35,
Okay.
but there are still plenty of scenarios and nuances to explore. We'll delve into those in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. We'll be right back after this short Just Kidding. Travis and Doug.
Huh!
We're diving right back in. No commercial breaks on the deep dive.
I knew you couldn't resist that fake commercial break.
Let's keep going.
But you're right, we have a lot more ground to cover.
Okay, so we've talked about the basics of sending and receiving sound signals,
Uh-huh.
but now I want to get into some specific scenarios where those skills really come into play.
Okay.
Let's start with a situation that often causes confusion for boaters.
Right.
Meeting head-on in a narrow channel.
Ah, yes. Head-on encounters in tight spaces. Definitely a situation that requires quick thinking and clear communication.
Okay, so let's break down the rules of the road for those head-to-head moments. What's the general rule?
The rule is simple.
Okay.
Both vessels should alter course to starboard, passing each other port to port.
So everyone moves slightly to their right, creating a safe passing lane on the left.
Exactly. It seems straightforward, but it's amazing how many close calls happen because someone forgets this basic rule.
Okay, but what if one vessel is significantly larger or faster than the other? Does that change things?
The rule itself doesn't change.
Okay.
It's still port to port, but good seamanship dictates that the larger or faster vessel should take early and substantial action to make their intentions clear.
So if you're cruising along in your powerboat and see a sailboat approaching head-on in a narrow channel, it's really on you to make that first move to starboard.
Exactly. You have more maneuverability and can adjust your course more easily than the sailboat. It's about being the responsible boater and preventing a potential collision.
That makes total sense.
Right.
Now, I know we're focusing on sound signals,
Right.
but in a head-on situation like that where you can clearly see each other, are sound signals really necessary?
They're not strictly required, but a quick blast of the whistle can go a long way in preventing confusion. One short blast to indicate you're altering course to starboard confirms your intentions to the other vessel.
Ah, so it's like an extra layer of communication just to be sure everyone is on the same page.
Exactly. And remember, narrow channels can have unpredictable currents.
Yeah.
So clear communication is crucial to avoid any surprises or misunderstandings.
Speaking of narrow channels,
Yeah.
what about overtaking in those tight spaces? That seems like it could get tricky.
It can be.
Okay.
The overtaking vessel is always responsible for keeping clear of the vessel being overtaken.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the other vessel is doing something unexpected,
Yeah.
it's your job to make sure the maneuver is safe.
Okay, so no matter what the onus is on the overtaking vessel to be cautious.
Yes.
But what if there's just not enough room to pass safely in a narrow channel?
Simple. You wait,
Okay.
find a wider section of the channel, or wait for the other vessel to move over.
Right.
No point risking a collision just to shave off a few seconds.
Right. Patience is key. But how do you communicate that you want to overtake, especially if it's a tight squeeze?
Sound signals, of course.
Okay.
Remember those signals for overtaking we discussed earlier?
Yes.
2 prolonged blasts, followed by 1 short blast to indicate you're overtaking on their starboard side.
Right. 2 prolonged blasts followed by 2 short blasts if you're passing on their port side.
Exactly, and the vessel being overtaken should respond with that same confirmation signal.
Right.
1 prolonged, 1 short, 1 prolonged, 1 short,
Yeah.
to let you know it's safe to proceed.
But what if they don't think it's safe to overtake?
That's when they'd use that 5 blast danger signal,
Okay.
and you'd need to abort the maneuver immediately.
Okay, so even though the overtaking vessel is technically the giveaway vessel,
Right.
the overtaken vessel still has a responsibility to communicate any concerns and prevent a potential collision.
It's all about working together for everyone's safety. Now let's move on to another narrow challenge crossing.
Ah, yes, crossing a channel that always feels like a bold move, especially when there's other traffic around. What are the key things to keep in mind?
The most important rule is to never impede the passage of a vessel that can only safely navigate within that channel.
Okay, so if you're in a little runabout and you see a massive freighter bearing down on you, it's best to wait for the big guy to pass before you even think about crossing.
Exactly. Those large vessels have limited maneuverability and need the full width of the channel to operate safely. It's not worth risking a collision just to save a few minutes.
And I imagine sound signals play an important role in those crossing situations as well.
Absolutely. If you're the vessel crossing the channel, sound 1 prolonged blast to alert other vessels of your intentions.
And the vessel approaching the channel can respond with 1 prolonged blast to acknowledge the signal.
Right. It's like a little conversation in sound,
Yeah.
confirming that everyone sees each other and understands what's going on.
Right.
And of course, if there's any doubt or concern, don't hesitate to sound that 5 blast danger signal.
This is making so much sense.
Good.
But we've covered so much already, and I feel like there's still a lot more to unpack when it comes to sound signals and safe boating practices.
You're right. There's plenty more to dive into. We'll pick up where we left off in the next part of our deep dive, exploring even more scenarios and nuances of these essential rules. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the world of sound signals. We've covered a lot of ground from those essential passing signals in Rule 34 to the signals for restricted visibility in Rule 35.
And we've really been focusing on understanding not just what the signals are, but why they're structured the way they are. It's about thinking like a mariner, anticipating potential problems, and communicating clearly to avoid them.
Exactly, but even with the best intentions and a solid grasp of the rules, sound signals aren't foolproof.
Okay, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
What are some of the limitations of relying solely on sound signals out on the water?
Well, think about it. Sound can be affected by all sorts of things.
Yes, sir.
Wind waves, even the surrounding noise from other boats or waterfront activity.
Hmm.
In certain conditions, those signals might get distorted, muffled, or simply not travel as far as you'd expect.
So even if you're blasting out the correct signal, there's no guarantee that the other vessel will hear it accurately or even hear it at all.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to use sound signals in conjunction with other tools and techniques for maintaining situational awareness.
Like, what are some other ways to see what's happening around us, especially when visibility is limited?
First and foremost, never underestimate the power of good visual lookout.
Okay.
Even in fog or darkness, you might catch a glimpse of another vessel's lights,
Yeah.
or even their silhouette against the horizon.
So even a fleeting visual confirmation can help you interpret those sound signals more accurately.
Absolutely. It's like having a puzzle piece fall into place. Suddenly, that sound signal makes more sense because you have some visual context.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Visual lookout is definitely key. What about technology? How can tools like radar and VHF radio help us fill in the gaps when sound signals alone aren't enough?
Well, radar is like having an extra set of eyes, especially in low visibility conditions.
Okay.
It can detect other vessels even if you can't see them, and it gives you information about their range, bearing, and course.
So radar can help you build a more accurate picture of what's happening around you, even when fog, darkness, or distance might be obscuring your vision.
Exactly. And VHF radio allows for direct communication with other vessels.
Yeah.
You can use it to clarify intentions, confirm positions, or even just to say, hey, I'm not sure what you're doing over there. Can you explain?
That's a great point. Sometimes a quick radio call can clear up confusion and prevent a potentially dangerous situation.
Absolutely. And remember, good communication is all about using multiple tools effectively.
Okay.
Sound signals, visual lookout radar, VHF radio.
Right.
It's about integrating all of these elements to create a comprehensive understanding of your surroundings.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's not just about following the rules blindly. It's about using your judgment, your senses, and the tools at your disposal to make informed decisions and navigate safely.
You've got it. Now let's apply that thinking to a specific type of vessel that often presents unique challenges, sailboats.
Ah, yes, sailboats. I've always found them to be a bit unpredictable, especially when it comes to anticipating their movements. What are some things we need to keep in mind about their unique maneuvering characteristics?
Well, the first thing to remember is that sailboats are generally less maneuverable than powerboats.
Right.
They can't stop or change direction as quickly, and their movements are often restricted by wind direction and sail configuration.
So give them plenty of space, be patient, and be prepared to adjust your own course or speed to avoid a collision.
Exactly, and be extra cautious with sound signals around sailboats.
Okay.
They're often much quieter than powerboats, so those blasts might be more startling or distracting.
So use sound signals sparingly around sailboats, and when you do, make sure they're clear, concise, and well-timed.
Precisely. Now let's talk about another situation where caution and clear communication are paramount maneuvering in close quarters.
Okay, close quarters maneuvering. This always feels like a delicate dance where everyone needs to be hyper-aware of each other's movements and intentions.
Yeah.
What are some key considerations when operating in those tight spaces?
First and foremost, slow down.
Okay.
Reduced speed gives you more time to react, reduces the severity of any potential impacts, and minimizes your wake, which is crucial in close quarters.
And it's all about precise control.
Right.
Small controlled movements of the helm and engine, anticipating how your boat will respond in those tight spaces.
Exactly. And don't forget the importance of communication. Use sound signals, hand signals, even eye contact, whatever it takes to make sure everyone understands what's happening.
So it's about working together almost like a choreographed routine to avoid any bumps or scrapes. And sometimes the best move is to simply stop and wait for the other vessel to make their maneuver first, right?
Absolutely. Patience and clear communication can prevent a lot of headaches in close quarters. And here's a tip. Consider using your engine in short bursts rather than continuous power.
What's the advantage of that?
Short bursts give you more precise control and prevent you from building up too much momentum, which can be dangerous in tight spaces.
That's a great tip.
Hmm.
It's all about finesse and control in those close-quarter situations. And speaking of finesse, let's talk about a maneuver that even experienced boaters sometimes dread docking.
Ah, yes. Docking, it can definitely be stressful, especially in crowded marinas or when the wind and current are conspiring against you. But with careful planning, good communication, and a solid understanding of how your boat handles docking, it doesn't have to be a nightmare.
Okay, so let's break down the steps for a smooth and successful docking. What's the first thing we should be thinking about?
Before you even approach the dock, take a moment to assess the situation.
Yeah.
Consider the wind direction and strength of the current, the size and shape of your boat, and any potential obstacles in the area.
So you're basically creating a mental game plan before you even start moving.
Exactly. And don't forget to communicate with your crew if you have one.
Right.
Make sure everyone knows the plan and their role in the maneuver.
Right, because teamwork is essential when docking.
Yeah.
It's a coordinated effort with someone at the helm, someone handling lines, and everyone communicating clearly.
Absolutely. Now, as you approach the dock, slow down to a crawl. Use those short bursts of engine power for precise control, and be prepared to make adjustments as needed. And remember those sound signals we've been talking about.
Right. The one short blast for turning starboard, two short blasts for turning to port those can be helpful when you're maneuvering near a dock, especially if there are other boats around.
Exactly. Those sound signals are like a courtesy heads up to other boaters, letting them know what you're up to and preventing any surprises or misunderstandings.
Okay, so you've assessed the situation, communicated with your crew, approached the dock slowly and with control, use sound signals to alert other boaters, and now you're alongside the dock. What's the final step?
Securing those lines, this is where clear communication with your crew is crucial. Make sure everyone knows which lines to handle and when to cleat them off.
And then once you're all tied up safely and securely, it's time to relax and enjoy that well-deserved post-docking beverage.
Absolutely, but don't get too complacent just because you're leaving the dock.
Right.
Undocking requires just as much planning and precision as docking.
So don't let your guard down just because you're heading back out on the open water. Assess the conditions, communicate with your crew, and use slow, controlled maneuvers to depart the dock safely.
Exactly. Now, speaking of maneuvers that require a bit of planning and finesse, let's talk about anchoring.
Anchoring. It's such a quintessential part of the boating experience, whether you're dropping anchor for a lunch break, an overnight stay, or just to enjoy a peaceful moment on the water. It's essential to know the proper procedures.
Absolutely. And the first step is choosing a suitable anchorage.
Okay, what are the key factors to consider when selecting a good spot to drop anchor?
Well, first and foremost, you need to consider the depth of the water and the type of bottom.
Okay.
You want to make sure there's enough water under your keel, even at low tide, and that the bottom is suitable for anchoring, preferably sand or mud, not rocks or coral.
And what about the surrounding environment? Things like protection from winds and waves, proximity to other boats, and any potential hazards in the area?
Exactly. You want to find a spot that's sheltered from strong winds or currents, that's a safe distance from other boats or channels, and that doesn't have any hidden obstacles like submerged rocks or wrecks.
So you're basically looking for a calm, safe, and relatively secluded spot where you can relax and enjoy your time at anchor.
Exactly. Now, once you've found the perfect spot, it's time to drop the anchor, but there's a specific technique to doing it effectively.
Okay, let's break it down. What's the best way to ensure a good anchor set?
First, approach your chosen spot slowly and into the wind or current.
Okay.
This will allow your boat to settle back on the anchor line as it's being paid out,
Yeah.
which helps to prevent tangling and ensure a proper set.
Okay, so approach slowly and into the wind or current. Got it. And once you're in position, it's just a matter of letting go of the anchor, right?
Well, not exactly. You don't want to just drop it all at once.
Right.
Let out the anchor line, gradually keeping a close eye on your position and how the boat is settling.
And how much anchor line should you let out? Is there a general rule of thumb?
Yes, a good rule of thumb is to use a scope of at least 5.1. That means 5 times the depth of the water.
Okay.
So if you're in 10 feet of water, you should let out at least 50 feet of anchor line.
Okay, so scope is basically just the fancy nautical term for how much anchor line you let out.
You got it. And in areas with strong winds or currents, you might want to increase that scope to 7.1 or even 10.1 to ensure your anchor holds firmly.
So the stronger the wind or current, the more anchor line you need to let out. That makes sense. But how can you be sure that your anchor is actually set properly?
That's where checking your set comes in.
Okay.
After you've let out enough anchor line, put your engine in reverse and apply a gentle backward pressure.
Okay.
This helps to dig the anchor in firmly and make sure it's holding securely.
So you're basically testing the anchor to make sure it's not dragging.
Exactly. And if you feel the anchor dragging, it's time to try again. You might need to haul it in and drop it in a different spot, or adjust your scope to increase your holding power.
This is all great information.
Yeah.
But what about those times when the wind and current really pick up? Are there any additional precautions you can take to make sure your boat stays put at anchor?
Absolutely. In challenging conditions, you might want to consider setting a second anchor.
A second anchor like a backup.
Exactly. You can set the second anchor either off the bow or the stern, depending on the wind and current direction.
Okay.
This can help prevent excessive swinging and provide that extra peace of mind, especially if you're planning to stay at anchor overnight.
Okay, so having a second anchor ready to deploy is like an insurance policy against dragging or excessive swinging in strong winds or currents.
You got it. Now let's talk a little about anchoring etiquette.
Okay.
There are some unwritten rules and courtesies that every boater should be aware of.
Okay, etiquette. It's all about being a good neighbor, right?
Okay.
What are some of the key things to keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, be mindful of your swing radius. That's the area your boat will swing in as the wind or current changes direction.
Okay.
Make sure you have enough room to swing without bumping into other boats or obstacles.
So before you drop anchor, take a look around, assess how much space you need to swing freely, and make sure you're not crowding anyone else.
Exactly. And be mindful of noise-anchored boats can sometimes be a source of late-night revelry, but not everyone appreciates loud music or shouting after a certain hour.
Right, be respectful of your fellow boaters and keep the noise down, especially during the quiet hours. And if you're planning on running a generator or any loud equipment, it's always a good idea to check with your neighbors first.
Absolutely. A little consideration goes a long way in creating a harmonious anchoring experience.
This all makes perfect sense. It's
Sure.
about being aware of your impact on others and being a considerate member of the anchoring community.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about a topic that's often overlooked but absolutely crucial for safe anchoring, monitoring your position.
Monitoring your position, you mean making sure you're not drifting.
Exactly. Even a slight drift can put you in a dangerous situation, especially in crowded anchorages or in areas with strong currents.
Okay, that makes sense. So how can boaters effectively monitor their position while at anchor?
The most basic method is to use visual reference points.
Okay.
Choose two fixed objects on shore that are in line with each other.
Yeah.
If they start to move out of alignment, you're dragging or drifting.
So it's like using those landmarks to create your own personal navigational system.
Exactly. It's a simple but effective way to keep tabs on your position, and if you have a GPS unit, that can be an even more accurate tool for monitoring.
Right. Most GPS units have an anchor alarm feature that will alert you if you drift beyond a certain distance from your original anchoring position.
Exactly. So regular checks of your visual reference points and your GPS unit are key to a safe and worry-free anchoring experience.
Okay, so visual checks, GPS monitoring, and always being aware of the potential for dragging or drifting. This all sounds like good common sense, but I'm sure it's easy to get complacent when you're relaxing at anchor.
You're absolutely right. That's why it's important to establish a routine for monitoring your position and to make sure you're always prepared to react if you start to drag. And remember, if you do start to drag, don't panic. Just re-anchor in a different spot or adjust your scope until you have a firm hold.
Great advice. Anchoring is such a fundamental part of boating, and it's clear that there's more to it than just tossing the anchor over the side and hoping for the best.
Absolutely, anchoring safely and effectively requires knowledge, skill, and a healthy dose of awareness.
And speaking of awareness, let's transition to another essential skill for any boater, especially those operating in busy waterways, understanding the rules and etiquette of passing other boats.
Passing, it's something we do countless times while boating, but it's a maneuver that requires careful attention and a solid understanding of the rules of the road.
Because a simple miscommunication or misjudgment during a pass can lead to a close call or even a collision, right?
Exactly. So let's dive into the key principles of safe and courteous passing, starting with those basic rules of the road.
Okay, what's the most fundamental rule when it comes to passing another vessel?
The general rule is to pass on the other vessel's port side. That's their left side.
So basically, you want to create a situation where both vessels are moving in the same direction, with the passing vessel positioned slightly to the left of the other boat.
Exactly. And in open water, this is usually pretty straightforward.
But things can get a bit more complicated when you're dealing with narrow channels or confined waters, right?
Absolutely. In those situations, there might not be enough room to safely pass on the port side.
So what do you do if you find yourself in a narrow channel with a boat ahead of you and no room to pass on their port side?
If it's safe to do so, you can pass on their starboard side, their right side.
Okay.
But passing on the starboard side requires extra caution and clear communication.
Okay, so starboard side passing is permitted, but only if it can be done safely and with the understanding of the other vessel.
Exactly. You need to be absolutely certain that there's enough room to pass without crossing the channel boundaries or putting either vessel at risk, and you need to make sure that the other vessel is aware of your intentions.
And sound signals play a vital role in those situations.
Absolutely. If you're planning to pass on the starboard side, you should signal your intention with 2 prolonged blasts, followed by 2 short blasts on your whistle.
Okay, so 2 prolonged blasts followed by 2 short blasts for a starboard side pass. Got it. And how should the other vessel respond if they agree with the maneuver?
They'll respond with that same confirmation signal we talked about earlier, 1 prolonged blast, followed by 1 short blast, then 1 prolonged and 1 short. Again, it's their way of saying, yep, I see you, go ahead and pass.
But what if they don't think it's safe for you to pass on their starboard side?
Then they'll sound the danger signal, 5 or more short blasts, and when you
Yeah.
hear that signal, you need to abort the maneuver immediately, no questions asked.
So even though you might technically have the right of way in that situation, it's crucial to respect the other vessel's judgment and avoid any actions that could put either boat at risk.
Exactly. It's all about shared responsibility for safety. Now, let's talk about passing sailboats specifically because they present some unique challenges.
Right. We talked earlier about how sailboats are less maneuverable than powerboats. So I imagine that passing them requires extra care.
Absolutely. You need to give them even more space than you would give a powerboat and be extra careful with your own speed and course.
And remember that sailboats are often much quieter than powerboats, so they might not be as aware of your engine noise.
That's a great point. It's important to approach slowly and make sure they know you're there before attempting to pass.
So be patient, be observant, and be prepared to adjust your approach based on the sailboat's movements.
Exactly. And if you're ever unsure about their intentions or if you think the pass might be unsafe, slow down, hold back, and observe their movements for a while before proceeding.
Okay, so we've talked about the basic rules of passing, the importance of clear communication, and the specific considerations for passing sailboats. But what about general passing etiquette? Are there any unwritten rules or guidelines that can help make those interactions smoother and safer for everyone?
Absolutely. Etiquette is just as important as the rules themselves. It's about being respectful of other boaters and creating a safe and enjoyable environment for everyone on the water.
So what are some key points of passing etiquette? What makes a boater a good neighbor when it comes to passing situations?
Well, first and foremost, don't crowd other boats.
Yeah.
Give them plenty of space to maneuver and avoid cutting them off or passing too close.
Right.
Even if you technically have the right of way, it's still rude and potentially dangerous to squeeze past another vessel unnecessarily.
That makes sense. It's about being considerate and giving other boaters the space they need to operate safely and comfortably.
Exactly, and be mindful of your wake.
Okay.
Reduce your speed when passing other boats, especially smaller ones or those near shore, to minimize the impact of your wake. Remember, a large wake can be disruptive or even dangerous to other boats.
Right. It's like the boating equivalent of slamming the door in someone's face. But sometimes, even when you're trying to be careful, a larger wake is unavoidable.
Hmm.
What's the proper etiquette if you do create a large wake that impacts another vessel?
It's always a good idea to circle back and check to make sure they're okay.
Okay.
It's a simple gesture that shows you care about their safety and well-being.
Okay, so don't crowd other boats.
Yeah.
Be mindful of your wake. And if you do create a disturbance, circle back to make sure everyone is all right.
You got it. Now, let's talk about a situation that can be intimidating for even experienced boaters encountering a large vessel like a freighter or a cruise ship.
Okay, large vessels, those definitely command a certain level of respect, and I can see how they'd present unique challenges for smaller boats. What are the key things to keep in mind when you find yourself in close proximity to one of those giants?
The most important thing is to understand the effects of their size and weight. Their massive hulls displace huge amounts of water, creating powerful suction and prop wash that can be dangerous to smaller vessels.
So it's absolutely crucial to give them plenty of space and avoid getting too close.
Absolutely. Stay well clear of their bow and stern and never attempt to cross their path directly in front or behind.
Okay, so steer clear and give them a wide berth. But what if you're unsure about the safe course of action? Is it ever appropriate to contact a large vessel directly?
Absolutely. They have professional crews who are constantly monitoring their surroundings and can advise you on the best way to pass safely.
So don't be afraid to use your VHF radio to communicate with them if you have any concerns or questions.
Exactly. Now, before we move on from passing situations, let's touch on a few additional considerations that are important for all boaters to keep in mind.
Okay, what are some other things we should be aware of?
Well, first and foremost, be aware of blind spots.
Okay.
All vessels have areas around them where visibility is limited,
Yeah.
especially larger vessels or those with high cabins or sails.
So when passing another vessel, make sure you're visible to them and that you've accounted for any potential blind spots.
Exactly, and use sound signals to alert them to your presence if necessary.
Okay, so be mindful of blind spots and use sound signals to make your presence known. What else?
Another crucial skill is anticipating the actions of other boats.
Okay.
It's all about reading the water, understanding how boats move and interact, and being able to predict what they're going to do next.
So observe other vessels, carefully try to anticipate their course and speed, and be prepared to adjust your own actions accordingly.
Exactly. And remember, not all boaters are experienced or skilled.
Right.
So always err on the side of caution and assume the other boat might not make the correct or most predictable maneuver.
Right. Always assume the other boat is being piloted by someone who's about to do something unexpected.
Exactly. It's all about being prepared for the unexpected. And here's a tip for anticipating the actions of other boats: pay attention to their wake.
Their wake. What can you learn from that?
A boat's wake can tell you a lot about its speed and direction of travel if you see a large wake approaching. It's a good indication that a fast-moving vessel is nearby, even if you can't see it yet.
So it's like a warning sign to be extra vigilant and look out for the source of that wake.
Precisely. Now let's wrap up this section on passing with a reminder about the most crucial element: communication.
Communication, we've touched on it throughout this deep dive, but it really can't be overstated.
You're absolutely right. Clear and timely communication is essential for preventing misunderstandings and ensuring a safe passing maneuver.
So use sound signals, effectively communicate on your VHF radio if necessary, and don't hesitate to use hand signals or even eye contact to confirm intentions.
Exactly. The more communication, the better. And if you're ever unsure about the other vessel's intentions or you think the pass might be unsafe, slow down, hold back, and communicate your concerns.
Okay, so communicate early,
Mhm.
communicate often, and don't be afraid to speak up if you have any doubts or concerns. Great advice.
Now let's shift our focus to a specific type of waterway that often presents unique challenges: marked channels.
Ah, yes, marked channels. They're like the highways of our waterways,
Right.
providing safe and predictable routes for navigation. But I imagine they can also be congested and tricky to navigate, especially when you have a mix of vessel types and traffic patterns.
You're absolutely right. Operating in a marked channel requires a heightened level of awareness and a solid understanding of the rules and best practices.
Okay, so let's dive into the key rules and best practices for operating safely and courteously in marked channels, starting with the most fundamental rule.
The most important rule is to stay within the channel boundaries. That
Okay.
means staying between the buoys or markers that define the edges of the channel.
So if you see a red buoy on your right and a green buoy on your left, you should stay between those two buoys no matter what.
Well, almost no matter what.
Okay.
There are some exceptions, like if you need to avoid a hazard or if you're directed otherwise by a controlling authority, but generally speaking, yes, stay within those buoys. They're there to guide you and keep you in the deepest, safest part of the channel.
And I imagine that speed is also a crucial factor in channels.
Absolutely. Channels often have speed limits, which are usually clearly marked or listed on navigational charts. Always be aware of the posted speed limit and adjust your speed accordingly.
So even if you're in a hurry, respect those speed limits. But what if there's no posted speed limit?
Even if there's no posted limit, you still need to operate at a safe speed, taking into account factors like channel width, traffic density, visibility, and any potential hazards.
So use your judgment and adjust your speed to match the conditions. But what about passing other boats in a channel? Are there any special rules or considerations beyond what we already discussed about passing in general?
The same basic rules apply, but in a channel you need to be even more cautious and make absolutely sure there's enough room to pass safely without crossing the channel boundaries or endangering other vessels.
So it's all about being extra careful with your maneuvers and making sure you have plenty of room to complete the pass without cutting it too close or straying outside the marked channel.
Exactly. And remember, those sound signals we discussed earlier,
Right.
they're even more crucial in channels where clear communication is key to avoiding confusion and potential collisions.
Okay, so use those sound signals judiciously and make sure everyone understands your intentions.
Now let's talk about a situation that often causes confusion for boaters meeting another vessel head-on in a channel.
Ah, yes. The head-to-head encounter in a narrow channel, it seems like it would be an obvious recipe for disaster. Are there specific rules for handling this situation?
There are, and they're very clear.
Okay.
When meeting another vessel head-on in a channel, both vessels should keep to the starboard side of the channel.
So just like with meeting head-on in open water, both vessels should move slightly to their right, allowing them to pass each other on their left sides or port to port.
Exactly. It seems simple, but it's amazing how often this basic rule gets overlooked, leading to those heart-stopping near misses.
Okay, so starboard side, starboard side, starboard side. Got it.
Mm.
But what if one vessel is much larger or faster than the other? Does that change anything?
It doesn't change the rule itself, but it does affect how you apply it.
Okay.
The larger or faster vessel should take early and substantial action to make their intentions clear and allow the smaller vessel ample time and space to maneuver.
So if you're in a small sailboat and you see a large powerboat approaching head-on in a narrow channel, you can expect the powerboat to make the first move to starboard and give you plenty room to pass safely.
Exactly. They have more maneuverability and can adjust their course more easily than you can.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about another maneuver that requires extra caution in a channel crossing.
Crossing a channel can be a risky move if it's not done carefully.
So what are the key things to keep in mind when you need to cross a channel, especially a busy one?
First and foremost, wait for a safe opportunity. Don't even think about crossing if there's a vessel approaching that could create a collision risk.
Okay, so be patient. Observe the traffic flow and make sure there's a clear gap before attempting to cross. What else?
Whenever possible, try to cross at a 90-degree angle. This reduces the amount of time you're spending in the channel, minimizing your exposure to other vessels, and decreasing the chances of an accident.
So a perpendicular crossing is the safest option. And I imagine that sound signals can also be helpful in those crossing situations, just like with passing.
Absolutely. If you're about to cross a channel, sound one prolonged blast to alert other vessels of your intentions.
And if you're the one approaching the channel and you see a boat preparing to cross, you can respond with one prolonged blast to acknowledge their signal.
It's all about confirming that everyone sees each other and understands what's happening. And of course, if you have any doubts about the crossing vessel's intentions or if you think the crossing might be unsafe, don't hesitate to sound that 5-blast danger signal.
Right? Always err on the side of caution and communicate clearly. Now let's move on to some additional considerations for operating safely and responsibly in marked channels.
Sounds good. What other things should boaters keep in mind?
Well, currents can be a major factor in channels, especially narrow ones or those with constrictions.
That's right. Currents can push you off course or make it difficult to maintain control, so it's crucial to be aware of the current direction and strength before you enter a channel.
So always consult your charts, check for local current information, and be prepared to adjust your course and speed accordingly.
Exactly, and be mindful of your wake, especially in channels with narrow banks or shallow areas.
Right, a large wake can cause erosion damage property and create hazardous conditions for other vessels.
So slow down when approaching other boats, docks, or shorelines to minimize your wake and always respect those no-wake zones.
Okay, so beware of currents, minimize your wake, and obey those no-wake signs. Got it.
Now let's talk about a topic that's absolutely essential for safe navigation in any waterway, but especially in marked channels, understanding aids to navigation.
Ah, yes. Aids to navigation. Those buoys, beacons, lighthouses, and other markers that guide us safely to our destinations.
They're the silent guardians of the waterways, and understanding how to read and interpret them is crucial for any boater.
Okay, let's dive into the basics of aids to navigation. What's the first thing we need to know?
Well, the first thing to understand is that aids to navigation are generally divided into two categories, lateral markers and non-lateral markers.
Okay, so lateral markers and non-lateral markers. What's the difference between the two?
Lateral markers define the edges of channels, while non-lateral markers provide information about specific hazards or points of interest.
So those red and green buoys we mentioned earlier are lateral markers.
Exactly. Red buoys mark the right side of the channel when you're entering from seaward, while green buoys mark the left side.
And they always come in pairs, right? A red buoy on one side, a green buoy on the other.
That's right, and they're numbered sequentially, with red buoys having even numbers and green buoys having odd numbers.
So if you see a red buoy numbered 2 on your right side, as you enter a channel, you should be looking for a green buoy number 3 on your left side.
Exactly. The numbers help you keep track of your position in the channel and ensure you're on the correct course.
Okay, so red right, even green left, odd. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, what about those non-lateral markers? What kind of information do they provide?
Non-lateral markers come in all sorts of shapes, colors, and symbols, and each one conveys specific information about hazards, obstructions, or points of interest.
So, for example, you might see a white buoy with an orange diamond shape indicating a danger area.
Exactly. Or you might see a yellow buoy with a black square marking a controlled area where certain activities are restricted.
Wow, there's a whole language of buoys out there, but how are you supposed to keep track of all these?
There is, it's like learning a new language, but luckily you don't have to memorize it all in your head.
So where do you go to decipher this buoy code?
Your navigational charts? Charts are your best friend when it comes to understanding aids to navigation. They provide detailed information about every marker, including its shape, color, and meaning.
Okay, so charts are crucial, but even with the best charts in the world, you have to remember that those aids to navigation aren't always perfect, right?
That's a great point. Buoys can be damaged, moved, or even missing altogether due to storms, accidents, or vandalism.
So you can't rely on them 100%. It's still important to use your common sense. Consult your charts and cross-reference your position using other navigational tools like GPS or radar.
Exactly. Think of aids to navigation as helpful guides, but not the be-all and end-all of navigation. Now, speaking of GPS, it's worth talking about how that technology interacts with traditional aids to navigation.
Yeah, GPS is amazing, but it's not a magic bullet, is it?
Not at all. GPS is a fantastic tool, but it's not a replacement for understanding and using those traditional aids to navigation.
So it's best to think of GPS as a supplement to your navigational skills, not a substitute for them.
Exactly. GPS can confirm your position, help you track your course, and even alert you if you're getting off track. But you still need to be able to read and interpret those buoys and markers, especially if your GPS fails or becomes unreliable.
Right. You don't want to be caught in a situation where your GPS goes out and you're suddenly surrounded by buoys that you don't understand. So know your traditional navigation, even in this age of technology.
You got it. Now, before we move on from aids to navigation, let's wrap things up with a few final thoughts on safety.
Safety first. What are some key things to keep in mind when you're navigating, using aids to navigation, especially in those marked channels?
Well, first of all, don't get so focused on reading those buoys that you forget to be aware of your surroundings.
Right. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're concentrating on charts and markers. But you have to remember that there are other boats out there as well as potential hazards that might not be marked.
Exactly. Keep your head up, scan the water, and be aware of everything that's happening around you.
Okay, so stay aware. What else one?
Be extra cautious when navigating at night or in restricted visibility.
Right, because those buoys and markers can be much harder to see in low light conditions.
That's right. Slow down, double check your position, and if you have any doubts about your course, it's always better to err on the side of caution and anchor up until conditions improve.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on aids to navigation now. Let's shift gears slightly and talk about a topic that's important for all boaters, regardless of where they're operating, understanding the environmental impact of our actions on the water.
Ah, yes, environmental awareness. It's something that every boater should take seriously.
Because our boats and our actions, even seemingly small ones, can have a significant impact on those delicate ecosystems that make our waterways so special.
That's right. Everything from fuel spills and sewage discharge to noise pollution and habitat disruption can leave a lasting mark on the environment if we're not careful.
So it's all about minimizing our impact and taking steps to protect the waterways we love. Where do we even begin?
It starts with the basics. Properly maintain your engine to prevent oil leaks and fuel spills.
And use designated pump-out stations for sewage disposal
Yeah.
rather than discharging directly into the water.
Exactly. And don't be a litter bug, never throw garbage overboard, and be mindful of what you bring on board to minimize waste in the first place.
Right, because even small pieces of plastic can have a devastating impact on marine life.
Absolutely. And speaking of marine life, let's talk about our impact on wildlife.
Okay, wildlife. What are some key things boaters should keep in mind?
We'll avoid disturbing nesting birds or marine mammals, and be careful not to damage sensitive habitats like coral reefs or seagrass beds.
So basically, observe wildlife from a respectful distance and avoid any actions that could harm their homes or disrupt their natural behaviors.
You got it. And if you're fishing, always follow local regulations and practice catch and release whenever possible.
Right, responsible fishing practices are crucial for maintaining healthy fish populations for everyone to enjoy.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about a type of pollution that's often overlooked, noise pollution.
Noise pollution. How does that affect the environment?
You might be surprised to learn that many marine animals rely on sound for essential activities like communication, navigation, and finding food.
So excessive noise from our boats can interfere with those activities.
Exactly. It can stress animals, disrupt their feeding habits, and even drive them away from their natural habitats.
That's fascinating. I never really thought about the impact of noise on marine life before. So how can we minimize our noise footprint?
Keep your engine noise to a minimum, avoid blasting music, and be respectful of quiet zones or areas where noise restrictions are in place.
Okay, so be mindful of your noise levels and try to keep things quiet, especially in areas known to be sensitive habitats.
Now let's wrap up our deep dive with a topic that ties everything together, maintaining situational awareness.
Situational awareness, it's a term we hear a lot, but what does it really mean in the context of boating?
It's about having a clear understanding of everything that's happening around you on the water, being able to anticipate potential hazards, and being prepared to react quickly and effectively to unexpected situations.
So it's about being present, being observant, and being engaged with your surroundings. It's not just about looking out the window. It's about using all of your senses to gather information.
Exactly. Constantly scan the water for other boats, obstacles, changes in conditions. Listen for sound signals, engine noise, anything unusual, and pay attention to how your own boat is moving, how it's responding to the wind and waves.
So it's about taking it all in, the sights, the sounds, even the feel of the boat, and using that information to make informed decisions.
Precisely, now maintaining that level of awareness can be tough, especially when you're in a busy waterway or conditions are changing rapidly.
So what are some tips for staying alert and focused on the water?
Well, first and foremost, minimize distractions.
So put away the cell phones, turn down the music, and resist the urge to check social media every 5 minutes.
Exactly. Boating requires your full attention, especially in challenging environments.
And if you have a crew, communicate with them, share your observations, and encourage them to do the same. Multiple sets of eyes and ears are always better than one.
That's a great point. Teamwork is crucial for maintaining situational awareness.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one more aspect of situational awareness, understanding the rules of the road.
Ah, yes, the rules of the road, those essential navigation rules that govern how boats interact with each other.
We touched on some of them already, but there's a whole set of rules that cover everything from right-of-way to sound signals to actions to avoid collisions. And it's crucial for all boaters to know and understand these rules, right?
Absolutely. They're not just arbitrary regulations, they're designed to prevent accidents and ensure a safe and orderly flow of traffic on the water.
So how can boaters learn these rules?
The best way is to take a boating safety course. Most states require some form of boating education, and those courses cover those essential navigation rules in detail.
And even if you're not required to take a course, it's still a great idea. It's an investment in your own safety and the safety of everyone else on the water.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so take a boating safety course, know the rules of the road, and always be aware of your surroundings.
Exactly. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive, let's emphasize a few final tips for maintaining situational awareness that apply to every boater.
Okay, what are some final words of wisdom?
First, plan your trips carefully, know your route, check the weather forecast, and be aware of any potential hazards along the way.
So don't just wing it, do your homework and be prepared.
Exactly, and be realistic about your own skills and limitations. Don't attempt to navigate in conditions that exceed your abilities or the capabilities of your boat.
Right. There's no shame in staying ashore if the weather is rough or if you're not feeling confident about handling your boat in certain conditions.
Absolutely. And lastly, always be prepared for the unexpected.
Because no matter how well you plan, boating is inherently unpredictable. Weather can change quickly, equipment can malfunction, and other boaters might not always behave as you expect.
So always have a backup plan, be flexible, be adaptable, and never assume that everything will go according to plan.
Well said. Flexibility and adaptability are key to safe boating. Well, Travis and Doug, we've covered an incredible amount of ground in